Welcome to Age Lust, a podcast where we share uninhibited stories about aging, desire, and wisdom. We focus on quality of life issues like sex, hormones, and the messiness of getting older and anything and everything you might consider TMI. I'm your host, Jessica Podonsky, a double board certified family nurse practitioner and menopause provider. I'm passionate about creating a community where we talk about embracing our gray hair, or even waxing it off down there, and how you're never too old to get an STI. And if you do, write me and we'll talk about it. While I am a medical professional, I am not your medical professional. Always consult with your healthcare team before making any changes. This is another episode of Age Lust. I have been wanting to do this type of episode now since way before I started. I have a special guest today who is Melissa Pinto Carnagey.
And love it.
And she or they, right?
Mm-hmm.
Those are your pronouns. Okay. Interchangeable. I love it. Melissa is a renowned sexuality educator, best-selling author, and leading national voice for sex-positive education for youth and families. Her work with sex-positive families, which is how I found her, and I'm going to talk about that, has been featured in Huffington Post, Parents Magazine, CNN, New York Times, BuzzFeed, and reaches thousands of families around the globe via an engaged social media following, engaged social media following, and monthly live workshops. Sex Positive Families is guided by the belief that all children deserve holistic, comprehensive, and shame-free sexuality education so they can live informed, empowered, and safer lives. Melissa is confident this work starts in homes. So that is the official small bio, but I found you on the internet, on Instagram, and your hair was much shorter then.
It was.
This is like a few years ago, and I love the idea of working with families and being sex positive because it's so important. And the reason I became a family nurse practitioner as opposed to an adult was so that I could talk to adolescents. I don't so much want to talk to little kids, but adolescents, I could communicate better with them. So I've been following you for a long time, and I'm so super excited to talk to you. I'm going to say one more thing about that, because in the early days, you would be talking to your one child who was in, I believe, the single digit ages, right?
Yeah.
So less than 9.
Mm-hmm.
And then I don't know how many children you have, but I believe your oldest child who was an emerging adult.
Mm-hmm.
And the differences and how exciting. So I'm so excited to have you. So Melissa is the creator of Sex Positive Families. Melissa, thank you for doing this. Thank
you. Thank you so much for having me. And even when I was just kind of going back and looking back at how we may have first connected, and I saw that you had written this article, and so I was connected to your website at one point. You'd written this article that I really loved. And so I know that I'll just say this, doing work virtually on these internets, especially with social media, there are so many pathways to connecting, and especially if you're doing anything that's a business, it's just amazing how we can get ideas out there and create a sense of community. So that is a positive that I've taken away from being active on social media, and in particular doing this kind of work, is being able to find like-minded people and people who believe something different for our future, for our young people. Yeah, I'm honored to be here and to be in space with you. And yes, time has passed. So yes, my hair has gotten longer. My children have gotten longer and older. I've gotten older and wiser. And so it's been a beautiful journey. I'm so grateful. My oldest is 25.
Wow.
Now she is a nurse. She works in postpartum. We're here in Austin, Texas, and she also tutors students for the NCLEX.
Oh, wow.
So she was valedictorian of her nursing school class. So she's got big brain.
Yeah.
And then my middle child is my teen currently. So that was probably the single digit young person that I was referencing probably in something back then. He's amazingly curious. I mean, most of my inspiration these days comes from the conversations that we just continue to have, that just continue to evolve, and just the openness that we have, which is just I cherish it so deeply. He's a freshman in high school. He's 14, about to be 15. And then I have a bonus son who is about to be 11, so fifth grade. So yeah, we're in the tween teen. And then I've got, my adult young person who was deeply the inspiration for everything that I do with this work because I was a young parent. I was 17 when I learned that I was pregnant with her. And it was through that experience of, trying to navigate adolescence here in Texas, Black and brown, parents, Catholic infused upbringing, just things that I feel influenced my lack of awareness of so many things that I now get to teach my own children and that I get to help other families who may have had similar journeys with taboo and silence and shame-based messaging, a lot of trauma, as I know you very well, I'm sure, experience that a lot too in the work that you do. Trauma has a strong influence in what affects people's ability to feel any sense of comfort around these very human things, these topics, and how that then can show up in parenting. It's a lot. It's a lot. And so I just feel deeply honored to be on this journey and that families continue to trust us for the type of education and programming that we get to offer now and experiences that we get to walk alongside families as they're trying to navigate these conversations and break the cycle. So, yeah.
Yeah, and it's such important work. And sex positive families has really evolved and gotten bigger and bigger. When you first started this work or looked back maybe at being 17 and being a parent, what was the main message you wanted to give yourself, your inner child, and your child about sex and sexuality?
No one's ever asked me that question and like that. So I really value receiving this question first to think on. My answer goes to really wished that I had support. And when I say support, I mean that I wished that I had a sense of someone who had my best interest in mind. Not just any someone, because there certainly could be a lot of that going on, but who had my best interest in mind and who could help me feel like I wasn't weird, bad, or wrong, for things that I thought, things that I wondered, things that I was feeling, things that I was unsure of and trying to navigate. I remember feeling like I was struggling to figure myself out and what I was supposed to do. The circumstances for me then at that age, my parents were in a very contentious divorce situation. So life was challenging and not stable in a lot of ways. And I have firstborn energy. So I was kind of stuck with I want to do well. I was scheduled to go off to college and then I was dating my child's father, but I didn't feel like I had footing in a way that I wish that I could have. And that became this is going deep in or just in a way that I, being able to reflect this back is special. Something that happened to me, this will make sense, this will connect, but something that happened to me when my daughter was at the age of graduating high school, that was at the same time frame that my mother experienced a real mental health break in a sense and disappeared. We didn't know where she was. Several months I had to go live, with my dad. There was just so much going on.
Yeah.
And so when my daughter to her senior year, and she very much has firstborn energy, so she was high achieving and all the things, intrinsically motivated in that way. There was this point where I had a realization that my entire experience up to that point of parenting her was as if I had been holding my breath.
Mm.
And the exhale that I started to feel like I could have, because we made it.
Mm.
We did it.
Yeah.
I did not have a break. I didn't have a mental, I'm still here. I didn't leave. Like
Yeah.
that, you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
that, like I remember having like an anxiety attack, it was exiting my body, this whole experience of realizing that I had so much fear the entire time underneath the entire time of parenting her up to that point. Fear that I would not be able to be well mentally, because I felt I had been on the receiving end of what it was like to have your mother leave.
Mm.
And my mother came back, and it took a while. There were just so much going on, and I can understand it now. I can understand so many things now, and through time, and our relationship, has had its journey, and it's in a great place now. And there's been so much healing and forgiveness, empathy that I've been able to access, but I definitely didn't have that for pretty much all of my daughters growing up. And so it just, so this is coming up because I feel like definitely it's informed how I've tried to raise my children, providing them with a sense of presence from me and me being available and creating openness so that they can feel, not just because I say you can tell me anything or I'm here, but because I'm physically and I'm showing up and through my spirit and my heart, if that makes sense. I'm making myself available in these vulnerable ways with them.
Yeah.
And just generationally, I mean, I know in my soul at this point that if my parents had definitely my mom, if my mom had access to the information, the support, the things that our generation of people now just have access to,
Yeah.
that previous generations just did not. I know that there would have been many things done differently, and she has communicated this to me in reflection, which was super healing to hear. Because otherwise, you can create narratives of like all of this was done on purpose, it was my fault or something done to me.
Mhm.
But she's a whole separate human trying to figure it out, and having her own experience. So that's been part of it too. It's just I have just been a real person with my kids,
Yeah. Yeah.
like not smoke and mirrors or pride or ego. Like and that's been freeing, because it's like, this is me, and you're allowed to be you, and we're going to be us together.
Yeah.
And what that's going to look like on a day-to-day basis, we're just going to see. And so in that is this sense that you are always enough as you are, and I didn't know that when I was younger. I didn't know that. Wow, you're making me go deep.
But it's so interesting, because the thing that keeps coming up for me listening to that story comes back to this Dr. Suzanne. I want to say her. Gosh, I'm gonna screw up her last name. I cannot remember her last name, but she's a very big sex therapist, Dr. Suzanne. And I've talked to her and I've sat with her. Anyway, she
That
talks about
happens to me too with names, so I am not judging. I'm like, I see you, I feel seen.
the erotic gaze. How we understand our erotic gaze, the first understanding is from the gaze of our primary caretaker, which is usually our mother. And so she says, and I'm not saying this, I could be getting some of the nuance
off, but the way that I understand it is that if that gaze from your mom is one that is preoccupied with worries or anger, or, I mean, I'm very vocal about the struggles with my mom, and my parents would say, like, you were literally raised by wolves, so we're happy that you're here. Yeah. So, if that gaze was not the gaze that you're creating, Melissa, for your children, we're already starting with this, what we associate with erotic love. And we're not talking about sex. We're talking about eros. We're talking about love. That then does translate into sex. What feels good, it's going to be very, very, what you remember from that first gaze is disappointment or frustration or absence or
loss,
vacancy or loss or whatever that is what you associate. So it's really interesting to me that it makes so much sense that the work you do now about being so open and vulnerable about the thing that is so deep in this particular United States, how we have like all of this, everything's so overtly sexual, but yet we can't talk about sex. And we definitely can't talk about pleasure. And we can't talk about it now in this country. There are places you can't even teach kids science, right? About like real, like just like literally.
I'm here in Texas, so I know what you're talking about.
That's hard. That's like every day, I imagine, to be a struggle. But anyway, I'm just making that connection that makes absolute sense. So do you remember the first conversation, the intentional conversation that you had with one of your children, and what that was, like what it was and what your discomfort might have been? Or
definitely not going to be accurate because I don't remember the literal first. I'm horrible. It's getting worse. The memory's getting worse. But one earlier one that always stands out for me with my daughter correlated with self-pleasure, masturbation. Just, we were together in her room in our nighttime routine. And I noticed that she was, she had kind of a look, like a gaze, and was kind of wiggling around under the blankets, and so, me being able to pause. I'll say this because my lived experience was not open around that. I was masturbating and exploring my body at a young age, and almost to a point that sometimes could feel, I won't say obsessive, but like, again, because there was no one talking to me about it, normalizing it, I picked up on the fact that something's wrong with me doing this publicly, and I can't talk about it. So that created this awareness or this air in me that like, something's maybe not okay that I do this, right? So therefore something may not be okay with me, because no one was there like normalizing or sussing that out for me. So this area of self-pleasure and as it related to my daughter felt really important to me, that I did not want her to have that experience.
Yeah.
I wanted her to know that it's okay to explore your own body. It's actually important for you to explore your own body, get to know your own body, and for her not to feel shame about that there's anything weird, bad, or wrong with her. So that was an earlier moment. I think she was in elementary school. I don't remember exactly which age, but it's that when I was starting sex positive families, transition. I used to work in HIV and sexually transmitted infections, did that for 10 years at this nonprofit and state government level, and then left because I was like, I do not do well in systems, I realized. Certainly not systems here in Texas and government systems. And I didn't have a backup plan, but I was rooted in, what is it that I really am passionate about? What do I really care about? What is it that I really want to do? What lights me up? And it was this piece around pleasure as it relates to conversations with young people and normalizing, their experiences and helping them understand the sensations, the curiosities, and then recognizing that there's been a learned taboo and constructed taboo in our society, which has made it difficult for parents to show up for these conversations and to know how and what to say and when. So that was where that connection came from, is truly inspired by that kind of moment, with my daughter, and knowing how important it was, especially for girl identified folks, young people with vulvas, like for them to understand that pleasure is your birthright, and that there's nothing weird, bad, or wrong, and that it is important. It is like critical that you have that shame-free space to get to know your body, whether it's through masturbation or whether it's just through that connection to your own body, without someone teaching you that is wrong or trying to disrupt that relationship that you can have and should have with your body. Yeah, so that's an earlier one that stands out. And then I'll say this, through my work, through me becoming even more enlightened and educated too around the earlier talks, that's what has allowed me then, with this 10-year age gap between having kids, that's what's allowed me then to approach even earlier with my son, a different approach, and with my bonus son, to incorporate more elements around consent at earlier ages.
Yes.
I didn't have that awareness when my daughter was, a baby in diapers. I look back though on home videos, because we took a lot of home videos, which love. I'm so grateful for, because the time just goes, it just goes. And there's moments where I'm watching back, I'm listening to myself and our interactions, and I'm seeing this beautiful look on her face, or in different. I've had this moment where I've said, you knew in your spirit how to do this. Before it was about reading it in a book or having it be the hot topic, on the internet. You were doing this. So that's where kind of that pre-conversation that we kind of had via email, where I am not the kind of person who is driven by like academic influence, it is for me very much like instinctual, if it feels right, if it feels good, then there's something there to follow and to trust.
So I was just reading in Tracy Stanley's book, Radiant Rest, and she quotes Neil deGrasse Tyson, and he talks about knowledge, and that true knowledge is not from intellectual pursuit. It is that sense of knowing. And the other thing that I just recently heard, just to affirm what you said, that has really changed my life, I think, because I'm the opposite. And I'm only the opposite because of this reason. Somebody was saying, I was listening to Martha Beck talking to somebody about something, and I'm not a big Martha Beck person, but do you know who that person is?
I've
Martha
heard
Beck?
the name.
She was like Oprah's life coach, okay?
Oh, gotcha. Okay.
But she's got like 3 degrees, all from Harvard, including a PhD. And she said sometimes people go to the academy to prove that they're not stupid. And so there's something so important about the work you're doing, and what you just said that is so fucking important, because it is about how you are not self-abandoning. And what you're teaching your kids and the people around you is how to not self-abandon. And one of the things that I know about my generation or my lived experience is that I was constantly surrounded by people who were always self-abandoning. And I think back at like boys sitting around, and they would freely talk about jerking off and masturbation. And nowhere was there a conversation about the pleasure of people who did not have penises. Nowhere were we sitting around talking about our self-pleasure. I think that has changed. And I think that one of the things I'd like to ask you about is, so what would you tell somebody, say that they have a young child, or they're witnessing their niece or their nephew or their grandkids really, who are self-pleasuring? And what do you tell people who have come from instinctively? And I think about my own mother in a certain way, because there's a lot about it, right? She's, there's cultural differences as to like what she sees folks on TV do, or, who is talking about self-pleasure as opposed to what she experienced now. Mind you, for my mother's 8th birthday, I gave her a Hitachi wand.
Hey,
I gave her a magic wand for her birthday.
love it. I love it.
Birthday.
The gift that keeps on giving.
But there are cultural things. So what would you say as something that feels, a couple ideas that people could authentically go to, where they're saying, like, they could be thinking, this is very uncomfortable for me to witness, and this is my response.
Yeah. Well, first, and this won't be a nice, neat package, but first, I think it's just so important to affirm the fact that often, not necessarily always, but often, that discomfort is learned. We did not come into this world with that discomfort, and therefore it is something that can be unlearned. It is something that we can kind of evaluate, and understanding what our reasoning would be for why we would want to do that, why we might want to look at this moment and this opportunity as an opportunity, as something different, as opposed to something bad or weird or scary or intimidating. And for me, I would say, and what other caregivers can relate to, is a sense that I don't want my child to feel shame.
Yeah.
I don't want my child to not know their body, not feel safe within their body, not trust their body. So grounding in what is it that I want my child to know or experience or have clear for them, and then being clear about, what is it that you can do to help support that.
Yeah.
And so chances are, if someone doesn't have this pre-conversation or pre-thought or any of this, kind of awareness before a moment it happens, then they may react, is what often happens. They react, and it's repeating old cycles or narratives around these things. And so it might be then they come across a podcast or a book or a conversation with someone telling them something different. So I would say then too, it's not absorbing shame about a moment that you realize you could have done something differently or said something differently or used it as a teachable moment, because all of this is something that we're collectively having to unlearn aspects and then learn new things around, and also find our own language for it, find our own levels of comfort with it. So I'm just often hesitant to just, here's a script, do this, right? Because that's just not going to feel authentic to so many people and so many moments, that people have. So drawing upon the relationship that you have, the dynamic that you have with a young person, keeping it authentic to what that uniquely is, and just connecting to what is it that you really want your young person to know and to experience, and how can you be a positive support for that. And if kind of thinking about those things can be a pathway to helping you figure out what is a way that I can approach this differently, and whether that turns into addressing a moment that you might have done something that you feel you regret or you could have done differently. And again, depending on the young person's age and y'all's connection, you can revisit moments. That's something I feel is so important to name, because some people take that a sense of, I failed, I ruined my child because I should have said this and I didn't, or I should have done that, or I shouldn't have done that. And being able to approach apology and repair, like one of the most powerful things that we can practice and then model for our kids. And so if you feel like you didn't approach this moment, or another example of a moment, in a way that you now have learned some new information, or you've taken some time to reflect, and you're like, wow, I think I want to do that differently next time. There may not be a next time for that exact moment. And so maybe you do, set aside some time with that young person, and often while you're fidgeting, doing something, maybe while you're playing with Lego together, or, doing something that's low stakes, not staring them directly in the eye in a confrontation kind of way. That's where things can feel awkward, but otherwise they don't need to be, they're not inherently awkward. And then say, I was thinking, the other day I reacted when I walked into the room, the living room, and I saw that it looked like you were connecting with your body. You were getting to know your body. And I say that too as a little like tip. It's even about the language we use and how we frame these things, right? Touching yourself, that can sometimes have a negative. We've made it's been made to be a negative thing. Sometimes even the word masturbation can feel triggering or too much or loaded, and especially with the younger, when the kids are much younger. And so, you were connecting with your body. I noticed you were getting to know your body. I saw you moving in a way that it looked like it felt good. And I want you to know that, in spite of how I reacted, what I actually want you to know is that it's important that you do get to know your body. And here are some safe spaces or safe times where getting to know your body in that way, connecting with your body, which can be called masturbation, where that's okay. And you can name those things, right? So your bedroom, and again, it's going to be different for everyone because maybe they share a room and maybe it's not the best, in the shower or in the bath, right? So remembering that these conversations don't have to be so high stakes. They don't have to be confrontations. It's not I caught, because that language gets used also a lot when it comes to masturbation or sex even, right? Your kid walked in and caught you having sex. That's such a confrontation and again, the shame, you're doing something wrong. No, you're sharing in a moment of intimacy. Your young person walked into the room and there's nothing inherently bad about that. Now, I know we're diverting into another example, but now something I make clear in a lot of the education I do around situations like this is there are boundaries. And so it's healthy and good to teach and model boundaries as it relates to bodies, as it relates to sex, so that becomes a teachable moment, right? Is that no, it's not okay or safe for a child to watch adults having sex. There's a boundary there. No, that's not okay. And why? It's important sometimes to take things to a why. And one big why that I think a lot of folks can get behind if they take it further is we do not want to normalize for our children the experience of them witnessing adult sexual acts. That can be a part of grooming and sexual abuse if a child is brought in to an adult sexual act. So if in any way we're normalizing child witnessing or being in space and there's not a boundary that is set, right? Then we could be making our child more vulnerable, unsafe touch, to unsafe situations, to not be equipped to recognize when something unsafe is happening.
And
to
that
them.
this is an adult activity for adults and not for children to
It's just like
participate.
driving. Yeah, it's just like driving, right? So we're not going to have our, 10-year-old drive a car, and our 10-year-old is typically able to understand that driving the car is not for kids, right? And there are so many culturally well-established boundaries around that experience of driving a car. It's not as taboo to talk about those boundaries, to assert those boundaries, to remind of those boundaries, to redirect if needed ever. If your kid does playfully get behind the driver's seat of the car and it's running and you're like, it's different though when we're talking about sex. It's been constructed to be much more of a taboo, and then it's almost like we forget how then it's like we get flustered, right, or triggered around how can I set a boundary that helps our young person. But again, understanding the why. Because we're preparing our young people for safer experiences in life. We're preparing them for healthy adult sexual experiences that involve informed consent, children cannot consent to sex. So I know we're diverting. I hope that's okay.
I want to go into the parent thing and the adults in the house. And I think what you've just said, it's just really super important for people to think about. But I think I want to go back to the idea of repair. Your idea of coming back, and even with our young adults or our emerging adults, and that we could probably even go back to them and say like, hey, I realize I've just learned this. I just listened to Melissa and Sex Positive Families, and I realized that I said things like, don't do that, don't touch that 10 or 15 years ago. You can go back and acknowledge that and say to your young person, say, hey, but I hope that you are experiencing pleasure, or open up that conversation of how they can and hopefully are experiencing their bodies in a pleasurable way. And that doesn't necessarily have to be sex. It could be yoga, it could be a whole bunch of different things. But I love that idea of going back. Well, let's fast forward and talk about the parenting thing, because I think I want to talk about media, but on a practical level, I'll tell you one of the things that's hard for me as a parent. So everyone is in my house, the 20-year-old, the 17-year-old, the 9-year-old, and then my partner. And it is so hard to, first of all, everybody stays up all night. I know in Texas, everyone's got probably big houses and big apartments or whatever. That's how I imagine a lot of people, because everything is bigger in Texas. New York, like I'll watch like home shows, and our house, is the size of like half or a third of whatever they're buying in Milwaukee. So we can hear everything that happens in the bathroom, and they can hear everything. I knew somebody who was talking about when he was a little boy, he heard his parents having sex, and he's listening and he's hearing these loud, painful moans from his mother. And he wakes up out of his bed. He's an only child. He wakes out of his bed, goes down the hall. He's like banging on the door. The door is locked, and he's banging and he's banging. He's so upset. And she's like, it's okay. We're just making love.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I loved that.
Yes. But, are you about to say but?
But I am not in that space where I can feel part of my personal frustration is that sense of like being very contained, because you don't want to hear your mother saying nasty shit if you're a person who likes to talk dirty and like be really,
okay. I'm picking up what you're putting down, and I'm loving it. And I want to just throw some things out there, because whether it's a radical thought or not, I am very much of the belief that so much has been constructed around all of this.
Yeah.
And many times when people are going back and they're telling stories from it's revisionist history in different ways, and often not saying the story you told me, but often stories of adults now who are trying to parent, who may have stories that ultimately felt negative, or that they were scarred, or that there's a narrative around the fact that parents could have, like, we are here, many of us, most of us, because somebody had sex.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Texas, and we're here. I did a whole posting on it.
Okay, right. So you get it, right? And now it doesn't necessarily always have to be. So I'm always want to be inclusive around that. And I just radically believe that if we are just honest, earlier the better, but never too late, because we can always apologize and repair, and we can help it make sense. But I was literally having this related moment with my teen last week, maybe earlier this week. So we'll close the door, because that for us, that's part of a boundary. So we will close the door if we're having sex, or sexual intimacy of any kind. That, again, when I do checks and balances, there are going to be certain acts that fall in the window of like, no, this is not something that it's okay for my child to see.
Yeah.
because I do not want those lines blurred. There's also the element of privacy and the importance of modeling privacy and the difference between secrets, privacy, and surprises. We talk a lot about that, especially with kids in the younger years, and that it's important to try to use accurate language around that for safety. But I want to model privacy. I also want to, and I want to model boundaries. I want to model love. I want to model healthy relationships. I want to model intimacy. I want to model desire and interest. And then there's a boundary that will show up where that doesn't translate into they need to witness. And it also, maybe radically, doesn't also translate into we act like we don't have sex.
Yeah.
Because that the math ain't gonna math.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And I don't think that that's helpful. I don't think that that's positive ultimately, because they will grow up and many times seek to have their own adult sexual experiences that possibly could include families. If I won't know until I fully get to live this out, because we're doing a lot of experimenting now in our generation of parents, right? We'll get to see what kind of therapy the next generation will need for all the things we think we're doing so great, So we'll see. But so far, having an adult child, and all these ages, I don't feel like I'm going wrong by acknowledging that, yeah, we have sex.
Yeah.
Like, I hope this is making sense. It's like, it's not something that I need to deny. It's not something I need to be confiding in my child about in terms of letting them know what our sexual dynamic and intimacy is, because again, boundaries, right? But not secrets.
Yeah.
Boundaries, privacy, modeling that is important. I want them to know how to model boundaries and privacy for themselves in their own lives, and not to have other people feel entitled to their information, or their experiences. So it's like this big, it's like I'm often asking why, like why am I approaching this in this way? Why, what am I hoping to instill, to teach, to model? And that's what guides me in so many things that I end up saying or doing or not saying or not doing, is just that ongoing checks and balances within myself. And so yeah, it was like the door was closed, so they're in they know to knock. They don't just open the door and walk in, because that's just established. That has nothing to do with whether sex is happening or not. That's just a boundary. I don't do that in their room. I knock and make sure that they say that, I can come in if their door is closed, right? And then there are certain things, though, that as children, like if they have friends over, for safety reasons, we're not going to close this door. We're going to keep the doors open. Here's the big reason why. We talk all of these things through so that there's context, and it's not about power and authority without explanation because I said so kind of stuff. So I think that also just that equity, just creating a relationship with your children that is rooted in equity and respect, you don't tend to get pushback on things because it makes sense. So anyway, door was closed, knock, and then, and it was just my partner and I. We were just sitting on the bed, relaxing after our shower, clothed. We just hadn't opened the door because we were just tired. We just hadn't opened it. And then my son walks in and he just kind of like looks at us, smiles, we're just sitting there, and he's like, "Were y'all having sex?" And I was like, no, we weren't, and there was nothing weird or wrong, about being just that moment, and if we had been having sex, and again, he wouldn't have opened the door because I would have set that boundary. I would have said, we're not, come back later, right? Like that whole thing. And then if he were to come in and be like, "We're all having sex." Yeah, we were having sex. We were enjoying time together, and it doesn't have to be weird or bad or wrong.
Yeah.
I just strongly believe that is just very constructed, and it is up to us and each as individuals to just assess where we're at with our own comfort levels around our own sexuality, sex, talking to our kids about these topics, because we will end up being confronted regularly through the experience of parenting with all the things They are just mirrors. They are mirrors. And it's a journey. We grow, we evolve, we learn new things. If we're not driven by pride and ego, then it allows us to free ourselves from this concept of needing to be perfect, from needing to say all the right things, to know all the things, to get it all right.
Yeah.
And then we could say, wow, I didn't know that. Or I just heard something new. I just learned this thing. So if we're modeling being constantly curious, and it's okay to be curious, then it makes it safe for our kids to be curious. If we're modeling boundaries, then we're helping them explore their own boundaries and understand. So that's really what, that's really what it's all about. And it's just being human alongside these other humans who are just in a younger stage of life, but they're no less valid, they're no less deserving. And in many cases, without their consent, we brought them into this world. And so for me, I just feel a sense of responsibility, try my best to be an authentic version of myself with my young people, and that we get to journey. And so I walk with a lot of gratitude, essentially. I walk with a lot of gratitude. I don't take it for granted. I've apologized a lot to my oldest, but for the reason that you were alluding to, is that, and she's witnessing me parent her brother in ways that she didn't get to experience me as a parent. Because I just didn't know.
Yeah, you don't know what you don't know.
Right. And then intergenerationally, I get to exercise that level of compassion for my parents.
Yeah.
And the many things that they did not know. So I just think ultimately just showing up with our kids, with our parents, with these generations in ways that are rooted in compassion and mutual respect helps us to be able to just access. Again, it's not about following a script, saying all the right things, the exact time, knowing exactly what to do. All of this, we can tap into our intuition better because it becomes less blocked. And I think what was the concept that this is like kind of for full circle, the concept that you were bringing up earlier about the self.
Erotic gaze?
Not the gaze. You were talking about generationally them not being able to, was it like kind of be an authentic self? There was a term you used.
Yeah. Losing themselves and not being able to, yeah.
I think that connects.
Keeping up appearances, the whole thing. You got to look a certain way. How could you leave the house not like pressed and dressed and da-da-da-da-da? Getting dressed to go to church, getting dressed to go to the doctor, getting dressed to do that. It's that whole kind of who is raising you. And, and for my parents' generation, kind of that also that fight of the 60s and free love. And that's really interesting because when I think about growing up with these hippie parents or hippie adjacent and free love and actually being exposed to things that I should never have been exposed to because they thought that they were doing the right thing. They were making things stigma free. And I want to talk, when you were talking about, obviously a trauma lens, I'm thinking the worst case scenarios of actually being a child and witnessing things that you should not witness in real life, standing there and seeing adults having sex. But you do your media literacy and porn workshop. And what do you think? Talk to me now that everyone's got these phones in their hands and they have access, and kids have so much. And even my 9-year-old was talking about like seeing something on somebody's phone or, and my 17-year-old, when phones were starting to really take off, when he was like, 12 years ago, when he was in kindergarten and then first grade, he even witnessed stuff that he should never have seen on a phone or anywhere else.
Yeah, same with my teen when he was in kindergarten, because kids are being given phones and often without parental controls or any kind of conversations about the responsibilities around these devices and what you may come across.
Yeah. Tell me a little bit about that work that you're doing around that.
Yeah, well, I mean, for the reasons that you're laying out, our reality right now is that the generations of young people that we have are all very connected to digital devices. You can't escape it unless you're maybe out in the woods and not like interacting with others, because many schools now require devices, laptops. Post-pandemic, so many schools have gone to having devices and laptops, kids being occupied even as infants. When you see an infant or a toddler being able to swipe to look at photos and they already know to swipe, or when you take their picture and they want to look at the picture because they know that they can see the picture. And, back in our time, you had to wait till the film was developed. Like you couldn't just see. There was nothing to see.
I mean, I guess a Polaroid, but you'd still have to be taking that.
Polaroid, yes. But I feel like, I always wanted, but when we didn't have the Polaroid, I wanted a Polaroid, but we had to wait for the Kodak film.
There. I have one behind me.
Oh, that's so cool. Yeah, no, we had to go to get it, wait and all of that. But my point with that is just that it's starting so young that kids are connected to devices of different forms. And the internet, these apps, they were not created by children. They were not created for children. Even the ones that say that they're, they were not created by children. They're created by adults with adult motives. And not that those motives are all bad or evil or anything, but, capitalism, money, to make money, to entertain and make money, right? So having that as a foundational understanding that these devices are not made for kids truly, and that we're handing kids tiny computers, whole computer operating systems, it's important that we're then thinking about how are we preparing young people, equipping young people with the awareness, the skills for managing these devices and the engagement that they will have, the expectations, so having agreements. We talk about that in our workshops and in our education, more so as opposed to rules around device usage. We want to establish some agreements, especially as they keep getting older, because then that is a conversation that we're having with our young people so that they understand why these agreements are important in terms of their safety and our responsibility as the adults, what we ultimately will be held to if something were to happen to them with this device. Those agreements can change over time. They do, as our kids grow and evolve, as their circumstances change, and so that needs to be an ongoing conversation. It is important that we're setting up parental controls, especially with the younger kids, right? And then we're weaning. So like, for example, my teen, 14, about to be 15. So we're in that sweet spot, absolutely, where he's wanting parental controls off of his phone, or modified in different ways. Like some examples of things that are on his phone still now are, he can't add people to his phone without, like, I'm the one that I have to unlock the phone, and he knows why. He knows exactly why, right? And so as we're leaning toward that independence, in that whole experience, it's not about power and control. It's not about that. It's not about, this is my phone and I'm, so we also don't use the phone as this tool of like, you did something wrong and so I'm taking the phone away and I'm going to give it back, that whole thing. And it sucks that I know it can be challenging to figure out, quote unquote, discipline, but I caution parents around using devices so freely and frequently if they're in the habit of that, of just the kids always being on some level of punishment or grounded and it's related to a device. It's important to think about what, does the punishment, truly fit, maybe what happened. The times in which with my teen where it has turned into a device was taken away was because what occurred was something that violated the agreements that we had related to the device.
Right.
Otherwise, like it's gotta make sense, because
Yeah.
then you just kind of lose credibility, and you keep doing, this back and forth
Yeah.
with this using the phone. But I see how parents can get caught up in that, because sometimes it can feel challenging.
You're talking to one it's a big one for one in my, yeah. It feels like that's the only currency you have, or the only thing that matters. But what's interesting about that, really, one particular person, it has made them much more pleasant to be around.
Do you mean without the phone? Is that what you mean?
Yeah.
Without?
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Right. So
Without the phone, like, there's engagement, there's conversation.
because here's the thing too, what is the age? Or you don't have to if you don't want to.
Yeah, I don't want to out the
Right.
person.
And that's totally fine. So
Yeah.
so what I'll say on this is that, yes, it is so important that we are carving out regular time where all of us in our home are device free.
Yeah.
But it's about how you approach it.
Yeah.
So it's not that substitute it with an activity that we're all going to do together. And that's the reason why we're device free. We're device free because we're all playing pickleball, or whatever, right? Our family's gotten into pickleball lately. We're device free because we're playing pickleball, right?
Yeah.
We're device free because we're watching a movie together and we want to focus on the movie.
Yeah.
We're device free because we're sitting at the dinner table and we're eating and we want to enjoy each other's company, as opposed to, all right, from this time to this time, you're going to be free from devices because I said so, because and then you'll tend to get a little more resistance with that kind of approach. And especially if there's that kind of, like you said, currency thing that's routinely going on, because then it's they're always feeling like they're being punished or for something. So it's just a dynamic thing. So I want to acknowledge a nuance there that you said. With devices for all of us, and especially for our young people, there can come a lot of pressure, especially if they're using those devices to connect to others, as opposed to just like playing Candy Crush or something.
Yeah.
But like if they're using the devices to text with other people, game with other people, there can come a lot of pressures. There's a really great book that I want to signal boost related to that. There's actually two. I have them here because I just did a workshop, the media and porn literacy, and I'm always showing them during the workshop. But Growing Up in Public by Dr. Deborah Heitner, and Behind Their Screens. And that one's by Emily Weinstein and Carrie James. These are two books that I highly recommend all parents, if they were able to access this knowledge and this information, to give insights into what our young people experience these days, having to feel connected, so connected in ways that a lot of us didn't grow up. Like we had boundaries, and this goes back to boundaries.
Yeah.
We had some boundaries structurally, like the fact that there was an answering machine, there was a landline, and an answering machine many times, right? So there was no guarantee that if you were trying to reach someone, that they were going to be home, that you were going to have to wait sometimes to hear from someone.
Yeah.
And so there was a level of patience, and the expectations were then different. Our young people are existing with a lot of surveillance that we didn't have, a lot of expectations placed on them, not just by us as parents, but by peers, by teachers, by other people that we didn't have that constant cloud of expectation and surveillance that they do. So the pressures are very different. And this all supports why it's so important that we are having ongoing conversations related to the devices that we use, how we're using them, if you have young people on social media in any form, and that includes if they're consuming YouTube, they're on social media, that we're connecting with them about what they're watching, what they're seeing, who are the creators that they like to watch, that they like to follow. And sometimes it's just, again, being in space, in earshot of the things that they're hearing and seeing and coming across, that all can spark conversation, that all can just be about getting to know our young people and what what they face, because there's so many messages that they then enter, and for me and my son at his age of 14, moving on 15, we have a nighttime routine, still that involves me spending time with him, back rub moment, because connection, through touch, I think is really important. So I can't agree with narratives around boys and teens and, oh, they're going to start to get like this and do this. Where I think that so much of that is normalized in our culture. And then it's just enabled and perpetuated. And, this angsty stuff, elements of that I feel are constructed.
Mm-hmm.
This is just a relationship, and how we foster it, how we connect, reconnect, and that's just an ongoing thing. It's a day-to-day thing, and being attuned, with our young people, if they come home or they hop into the car right after school, are we bombarding them with a bunch of questions? If we can see through their verbals and nonverbals that they might need them, Yeah, so just being attuned with our young people, which hard, because we as adults, we're juggling so many demands of this world as well, and the expectations that the world has on us as adults, separate from our kids, and then as parents. And so that's why I'm not here to lay out some arbitrary list of, here are the steps of being a sex positive parent, or here are the steps of being raising a kid that does everything right. Absolutely not. It is something that being willing to show up for the experience of being in connection and community with our kids, and that's an everyday experience and journey. Something I say, and I just, we woke up today. Not everybody woke up today. And what are we going to do with this day today? And how can I support you? How can I position myself to receive support from you? Because even that piece is like something a lot of us may not have grown up with, because of generationally, if there was just pride, ego, power dynamics. I have one way I know I've broken this is for me and my family have no memory. And even to this day, I would feel awkward asking my parents, how was your day at work today? For me, that was never something I could ask my parents. It was like, that's not information I'm allowed to know. Like, huh? I don't feel equity enough to ask them about their day. My son, every single day, at some point after he's come from school, how was your day? And he means it. And he's able to say that with his whole chest and like nothing, because we have a relationship that's rooted in mutual respect and equity. And it doesn't diminish having that kind of relationship doesn't diminish my role as his parent. It doesn't mean we're friends, like in a way that people like to, you know what I mean? Like
don't you apologize? Like that. I've heard that through, my adulthood as a parent, being told this. I'd be like, I have to go and I want to genuinely apologize because I fucked up as a parent that day, right?
And I'm gonna keep fucking up.
Yeah, but I want to acknowledge that, because how are they gonna learn? And don't you apologize to that child? It's really deep. I want to acknowledge love so much. We started in conversation through the email, and you just saying again that, you're not part of the academy. And I say that is awesome. And I love that you are so led by inner knowing. And I just think that is so phenomenal, and phenomenal for your children, phenomenal for the people that you care for and you serve and you hold space for, and phenomenal for your partner, I'm sure, and phenomenal for the people that your children will be in relationship with, and that you have been able to just acknowledge that about yourself as well. And I also want to put out there that I think if you are a person who is struggling with even the concept of a sex positive family or yourself being sex positive, I think that these little steps can also help people to reparent themselves and find more pleasure. So is there anything you want to, because we've taken a lot of your time, is there anything you want to end with, and how do people find you?
I always love to send the reminder that it is never too late. It is never too late. And what you said is wholeheartedly, it's at the heart of the work that I feel honored to get to do, is that this journey is healing work, and it goes both ways. We get to have these conversations. One thing that we do in all of our workshops is we have a parent-child interview moment, and afterwards we celebrate after all of our activities. And after that celebration, because of the beautiful, vulnerable moments that come from those exchanges in each family that shows up and participates, we say the celebration and the other activities might be a pat on the back, high five, fist bump. Maybe y'all have a family handshake. Maybe you like to dance it out and we play some music. But after that activity that's rooted in storytelling and empathy and building connection in the family, maybe after this activity, it's a hug. Maybe it's a family hug. Maybe it's a nourishing deep breath. And maybe that hug is the adult hugging themselves and hugging that younger version of themselves and able to say, we've got this.
Yeah.
And so it's truly, truly healing to get to raise children in a very different way than you experienced, and in a way that feels transformative and healing. So yeah, I just want to uplift that. And that is absolutely part of my North Star with this work and just within my own parenting. So I'm walking this journey alongside you, alongside other parents, and we've got this. We really do. We really do. We're doing beautiful work as far as with sex positive families and growing into you. We have a current book that is out, that's been out since 2020, Sex Positive Talks to Have with Kids. So if you've listened to all of this, or if you've poked around at the work and you're not sure, just if you are, what can I say? What do I need to say? When? How do I approach this topic, that topic, this topic? That book has got you. And it's not some long thesis, because again, I'm not in academia. And so it is really relatable and bite-sized and gets to the point to support parents who are doing this beautiful work in their homes. So Sex Positive Talks to Have with Kids is our book. At sexpositivefamilies.com, we have a beautiful browsable resource directory. So if you're also sitting here wondering, is there a book? Is there a video I can watch with my kids? Is there an article, a podcast about something about sex, about pleasure, about bodies, puberty? We have in our resources directory, you can search anytime by topic, age, and type, and that's a beautiful option, inclusive resources. And we have our workshops, Growing Into You. These workshops we've been doing since 2019. Wow. They are for tweens, teens, and trusted adults. So we teach whole families in community with other families, learning about, we have three workshops, and wow. The third one is releasing in October. Email goes out about that tomorrow. We're so excited. Puberty is our foundational course. We have that in a live, interactive, game-based workshop for families. And then we also have the self-paced course version of that, if you don't want to be on Zoom, if you want to take it at your own pace. And then we have our media and porn literacy workshop, which you talked about. That one, super awesome. We use breakout rooms. We are able to work with tweens and parents, and then teens and parents, so that they're getting age-relevant skills and opportunities to connect as a family on these things. And then tomorrow we will be sharing that. We have Growing Into You, Sex and Reproduction. So this is highly requested by our community. How can we talk about sex and where babies come from? And we also, that's for 9 to 15-year-olds and their trusted adults. So we're also using that breakout to allow for deeper dive conversations for teens who will be approaching sexual decision-making, helping them understand from a pleasure-positive, consent-conscious, sex-positive lens, helping them understand these concepts. So feel so grateful to get to do this work. Amazing. And that families trust. And then the last thing, May 2025 is when my second book comes out. It is called Growing Into You. It is an inclusive, shame-busting, get real guide to your changing body and mind. It is for 10 to 14-year-olds, and it is rooted in our puberty education that we do. So that one's being traditionally published. I'm on this journey now of what, there'll be a little book tour and all of this. So just really excited, a little bit scared
Yeah,
because I'm doing this work in some challenging political, climates, but it's important, it's life-giving, and again, I'm just so grateful. So I just want to say thank you to you for inviting me into your space and into conversation with you. You asked some just really beautiful questions, really aligned with, again, just the heart-centered nature of this work. So I just feel grateful to know that I'm out here parenting with you in this world, and we've got this.
Yeah, thank you so much.
If this podcast is helping you, please subscribe, rate us 5 stars, and leave a review. You can write in with questions at hello@ageless.co, and I'll answer them on the podcast. If you want clarity on your aging journey, you can book a private session with me on my website, ageless.co. That's AGELUST.co. We're on all the podcast platforms as well as YouTube and Instagram. Links are in the show notes.